Hello, everyone. My name is Sharon Wood, and I'm Dean of the Cockrell School of Engineering. And I would like to welcome all of you to our webinar today and to thank you for joining us as we celebrate the start of Black History Month. It's really a pleasure for me to be here today, and I'm so grateful to have the opportunity to host this event and hear from some of our school's esteemed and accomplished Black alumni. Black History Month is an important time for us to learn and to reflect as a school, as a university, and as a nation on where we have been, and most importantly, where we want to go. Milton, Tiwana, and Chad, thank you so much for your willingness to share the experiences you had as students, to tell us how you navigated the unique challenges that you faced, and how you're creating change in your communities now. It is really crucial that we have these conversations as we begin to work on a stronger and more inclusive and diverse community within all of the Cockrell School. So before we begin the conversation, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Alex Tekle. Alex is a senior in electrical and computer engineering here in the Cockrell School, and he's the president of UT's chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. In his time at UT, Alex has been involved in the Student Engineering Council, in the Texas Blazers, and Cockrell Schools Cares, which is an initiative to support the mental health of our students. After graduation, Alex is going to be moving to San Francisco to work for Google as a software engineer. Alex and his fellow officers in the National Society of Black Engineers have done an incredible job in helping to lead and develop this event. We're thankful for the time and the dedication they've put in, not only in this event, but really in helping guide the future for the entire Cockrell School. So I know everyone's interested in hearing from our featured guests, and without any ado, Alex, I'm very happy to pass it along to you. And thanks again for joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Wood, for the introduction. Again, my name is Alex Tekle, and I'm a fourth year here at UT Austin studying computer engineering. And I also have the privilege of being the president of the National Society of Black Engineers this year. I'm really excited to be moderating this conversation here today. We have three highly accomplished, amazing, esteemed alumni of the Cockrell School. And so I know we're going to be having a great conversation and discussion with these three panelists. But first, I'll move into introducing each of the three panelists, and then afterwards we can go right into our conversation. So first we have Milton Lee, who studied mechanical engineering and graduated from UT Austin in 1971. He is the founder of Lee Energy Partners and has over 40 years of leadership experience in the electric, power, gas, and utility industry. Lee is a prominent leader in industry and has been inducted into UT Austin's Academy of Distinguished Alumni and in the Walker Department of Mechanical Engineering Alumni Hall of Fame. Second, we have Dr. Chad T. Wilson, who studied chemical engineering and graduated from UT Austin. Chad is an associate professor of surgery at the Baylor College of Medicine and serves as the trauma medical director of Bentop Hospital in Houston. As a UT student, he was awarded the Exxon Technical Scholarship and worked as an intern for ExxonMobil for several summers before deciding to earn his MD from the Johns Hopkins University. Third, we have Tiwana L. Edmond, who studied chemical engineering and graduated from UT Austin in 1998. Tiwana is an energy industry executive currently serving as an America's Regional Director for BASF. She is a passionate advocate for STEM education, educational equity, and diversity and inclusion, serving on the board of directors for the Houston Area Urban League and the BASF African American Employee Resource Group. So as you can see, we have three amazing panelists here today with so many great accomplishments. And so I'm real excited to go ahead and just dive in straight into these questions and moderate this conversation. So without further ado, why don't we go ahead and just get started? So for the first question that I have today is just to kind of learn a little bit about your experiences in the working life and in the professional world. Maybe just hear any sort of stories or anecdotes that you may have. It's just tell us a little bit about the ups and downs of the professional world, especially your experience as an underrepresented Black professional within maybe your specific industry. So for this first question, maybe we can start with Chad, and then whoever wants to take over after him can go ahead and feel free to jump in. So I'm just going to hand it off to you, Chad.
Okay, well, thanks, Alex. So to repeat, the question is asking a little bit about the ups and downs of professional life, and specifically about um, being an underrepresented minority. I recognize my industry is a little different now than probably most of the folks on the call. So I'll kind of focus just really on my time as an engineer. Um, I think every individual has a lot of ups and downs in their professional life. Sometimes it's personal stuff. Sometimes it's the rigors of professional life. You have your wins where you perform well, and you sometimes have your losses where you don't perform so well. That's a universal experience. And to be honest with you, I don't know how much um, my race impacted my wins and my losses, my ups and my downs. But I do know that, perceptions about me uh, did really have, I mean, some of it I know I was impacted by perceptions about me, but most of it I really can't be aware. You're not really aware of why you don't get considered for things or why you don't get sponsorship. You're not really aware of why you do get considered for things and why you get sponsorship. You sometimes just find an email or a colleague who asks you to do something. So I think really trying to kind of know exactly what the impact has been, I can only guess. But I'll say this: when I was a student, there was a NSBE office, a really small office, which was a little haven where I spent quite a bit of time when I was in the engineering school. And everyone in that office knew I was performing well and knew that I was a strong student. But when I left that office and I would walk into the chemical engineering building, that was not the perception people had of me. And I was usually the person no one wanted to be on their team because there was just a perception I wasn't performing well. I wasn't really outspoken. I wasn't trying to convince everyone that I was performing well. And they had no way of knowing that I was knocking down A's in all those classes. So I recognized that as I was graduating, and someone was shocked to find out some of the medical schools I got into, and they were like, "Well, how'd you do that?" And I said, "Well, I mean, first you have to have a really high GPA," which they just were shocked that that's what I had. And I recognized that the perceptions, the way they filled in the blank, may have been because I was quiet, but possibly it was because of my skin color. And that kind of, so we all have ups and downs. I think the real question is how much does race impact my ups and downs? I know it has some impact, but I really can't know. And I'd love to hear what, Tawana or Milton have to say about that.
Well, I'll pick up Chad real quickly. When I was in school at the University of Texas, I was born and raised in Austin, and I have always since high school been basically the only Black that was attending anything associated with mathematics, science, and the common STEM title that you hear now. And believe it or not, I just had to get used to it because it didn't change once I got to UT. I was shocked I was accepted, to be honest with you. And I was in school for 5 years. It was actually a 5-year ME program with a minor in nuclear engineering. And it was the same at UT. So I sort of got used to it, even though it was hard to accept it. And I couldn't wait, Alex, to leave. My first assignment that I got was in San Francisco, and that's where you're going. And I joined General Electric Company, but GE exposed me to a lot of things that I never would have been dreamed of. And I worked for them for going on 6 to 7 years until they had the bright idea that I wanted to make a career living in Schenectady, New York. And it was averaging 112 inches of snow a year. Can you imagine me being Black up there, never around snow, growing up in Austin? I ended up resigning from that company. I didn't want to do that because they taught me a lot about leadership and a lot of opportunities that they did provide for me. They were upset, but I ended up coming back to Austin and ended up doing some things. And I'll talk about a little bit about that later. But I think the key thing I want to say about my experience was this: don't ever give up. Even if you're by yourself, there are good people out there. You just need to try to talk to them, see what they're all about, and try to put yourself in a position that individuals are willing to work with you at work, and then only take opportunities from a personal perspective to do some of those with them. But I would recommend that you don't spend too much time from a personal perspective. Actually work on your professional long-term strategies.
Yeah. So I'll comment a little bit because I think I come from a very different industry. I pretty much grew up in the oil and gas space since I left the University of Texas, holding several jobs, throughout the space, and of course, moving up into business leadership. But one thing was pretty clear about the industry in which I was working is that Black and brown people and women were definitely underrepresented in this space. And so I always found that when I would go into different companies or start a new job in a different role in a different, part of the business, there was always a perception, as Chad mentioned before, about which roles I belong in. There was never, here comes the new engineer, or here comes the new VP, or here comes the new director. It was always, do you work in this space in which their perceptions or box put me in? And I recall a situation when I first started, pretty early out of college, where I was in a position to be relocated to a job assignment outside of Houston. And I was so excited because it was going to be my first time moving away from home to take a real full-time job. And I accepted the job, and probably a day later, the HR manager called me in his office and said, we really want you to take this job. We know you can do it, but there are some people on the other side that want to cut your salary to move to this new job. And so I'm young, I'm confused. I don't know why this is happening. But I felt that it was a good opportunity for me to expand my skill set. So probably the next day, another HR person called me into her office and said, how do you feel about this? And I said, well, I really don't know how I feel. Why is this happening and what's going on? She said, if I were you, I would be highly upset. And I would say, no, I would not take that opportunity. And so we talked about it. We hashed it out. And basically I said, no, that I'm not going to take it. And at that very moment, she taught me a lot about standing up for myself. It eventually worked itself out. But one thing that I learned from that experience was that there's one thing to know your worth. I knew my worth. I accepted the offer. I knew exactly what I was meant to do. But she taught me to own my worth and to defend my worth. Because what ends up happening is that people's perceptions, this person's perception of who I was and what I was worth, was not anybody else's in the company. And so the beauty of that situation was that I wasn't the only one that stood my ground and defended myself, but there were other people in the company that did not look like me that actually worked on my behalf to make sure that his actions were not taken any further than his conversation. So for me, experiencing that in the box perception and always having this feeling of having to defend yourself and defend that you are the engineer or you are the VP has, been something that I have had to battle throughout my career.
Yeah, thanks for sharing those stories. I can definitely say the common theme about these perceptions and I guess these just stereotypes really definitely ring true to home. I obviously am still a student, so I don't have as much experience in the professional world, but you definitely still feel those I guess those perceptions in classroom settings and group projects, group assignments, and the engineering space is so full of these group projects and group assignments and things like that. So I can definitely say that resonated with me. I'm sure that resonates with many students in the audience as well. But for the next question, this is I guess a bigger sort of question, but it kind of has been a more popular conversation taking place, of course, over the last few months, as we've seen many sort of different movements and social justice conversations take place. Feel free to answer any sort of angle that you feel maybe you guys can tackle it on. But for academia and the corporate world, what steps should be taken to ensure that we're making progress towards a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable world that that are like safe for Black and Brown students and people across our country. For this one, I guess we can maybe start with Tawana, and then we can move on to Chad and Milton if you guys want to chime in also.
Sure. And that's a great question. And, you know, what we've been, you know, experiencing, I would say, over the last year or so is unfortunately not new. It's generational, where people have been for a very long time fighting for basic civil and human rights. And it's history repeating itself, unfortunately, over and over again. And I remember, you know, being at the university in the 90s when there was a professor who made very disparaging remarks about Blacks and Hispanics being intellectually inferior, not being able to compete academically. And it caused a huge, of course, uprising on the campus where, you know, we were in a position to have to defend, again, who we were. And those remarks actually ripped the very fabric of, in my opinion, who we are as a university and who we are as a student body, where they completely alienated and angered and deflated an entire community of people. And one thing that came out of that was that there were no consequences. You know, the university, of course, took a stand that we will not tolerate these things. Racism is not something we stand for. The remarks were disparaging and so forth. But the professor at that moment, I don't know what happened after, but he was able to keep his job. And so one thing that I can say moving forward to today, when these things are starting to happen, I think academia and corporate America are all standing up with these statements, confronting exactly what was confronted back then, that we will not stand for racism. There's, you know, an intolerance to racial and social harassment, but something's different. The difference is, I think corporations and universities are employing three things. They're taking action, they're leveraging accountability, and they're also showing consequences. So you will be hard-pressed to find any company who doesn't stand on these three things in their value system: honesty, integrity, and most importantly, respect. And if people aren't lining up with those things, especially in relation to how we've been managing the social injustice that's been going on, there have been noticeable consequences. So to me, that has been the fundamental difference in trying to move the needle forward and gain the momentum that we need to make change in these corporations and in the world, you know, for example. So for me, I think in order for us to continue on where we are, making progress, those three things have to be in place: showing very clear action, taking accountability, and of course, making sure consequences are loud and clear. And I'm proud to be able to work for a corporation that allows me to do that, to be a part of the solution, that are making huge progress in creating those action plans and accountability. So I do think that things are moving forward in a very positive way. And as long as we hang on to those things, we'll continue to make the necessary change required to move us forward.
I think you just made some excellent points, Juan. I really do. And I'll just add to it from two live perspectives of my experience itself. I currently serve on the University of North Texas System Board of Regents, and I'm 2 or 3 years away from ending my second term. I've learned a lot about higher education, and I believe the difference that's been made since I've been on this board is this: the Board of Regents have been making requests of the institutions for the University of North Texas at Denton, the University of North Texas at Dallas, the Health Science Center over in Fort Worth. We have a pharmacy school and a law school. All of that being said, we have had the courage to ask each institution that as we rotate through our board meetings is to have at least 5 students for 1 hour come in front of the board and tell us what's on their mind and have a conversation about it and make sure that everybody hears it, That way this board then can develop from the top what it is makes the most sense for those institutions. And we ask for reports each quarter that we come into the various campuses. The second one is one that's been part of my career. I recently ended my career 10 years ago when I retired, and I was president and CEO of CPS Energy in San Antonio. I got recruited to come down there from my job up here in Austin at Austin Energy to come and really do some things in that generation and transmission area. I got a lot of that done. The then CEO promised me that she was going to work for at least another 5 to 7 years. In less than 6 months, she walked into my office with her high heels on and said, "I'm leaving." I said, "You're leaving? What happened in 5 to 7 years? I lied to get you down here." I said, "Oh my God, I don't have any desire to be another CEO." And she said, "Well, make your mind up. You got 5 minutes and you can't call your wife." So it's obviously I made my mind up. I became the CEO, and I got it because of not only working and understanding what it takes to go to the C-suite, but I think the key thing is having the courage within the corporate office, just like I talked about with the Board of Regents, was to make sure that the leadership came from the board who had all the oversight for the entire organization. And I think once you get that courage from those particular positions, the justice that we're seeing today is excellent, because corporate America and higher education is taking it more serious than anyone is. And I think as long as you got those kind of leadership and those factors that's included, I think progress can actually be made.
So I think what you heard from Tawana, who actually really works in this space, is a blueprint of what's necessary for a corporation to be successful, Alex, and what you're describing. And Milton described, his perspective in achieving success in that space. And I just want to say, sort of take a step back to answer your question. I think you asked sort of, how can we progress in the diversity and inclusion space and equitability space? And to, for academia and corporations in general to succeed, I think that culturally we are in a worse space than I think we have ever been in as a country, in terms of how polarized everything is. The notion of being progressive in diversity and equitability and inclusion should not be controversial. That should be something that, like, everyone is, or not maybe everyone, but that most Americans support. However, we have a way in this country of politicizing things that shouldn't be political. We politicize science, as you are aware. And we also conflate things. So the conflation, for instance, of a man kneeling at a football game to say something about police brutality, and then the talking heads, or the conflation of that action, saying it means much more, saying that he doesn't support our troops and that he doesn't do this, when none of that was stated. We live in a time now where there is, it's really tough for a corporation to have good culture if within that corporation there is a cultural divide and people can't have safe conversations to talk about this stuff. And right now the conversations they're happening in two different spaces. So Alex, you're moving to San Francisco, you're going to work for Google. I need you to fix those algorithms that have us talking in our little camps and having our truth and somebody else having their truth, because I believe that ultimately that cultural milieu that we are currently in makes it really hard for any academic institution or any corporation to move the needle. And it's like I said, it's worse right now than I can ever remember it being. It's really hard to have a safe conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for each of your unique, I guess, takes on that pretty big question there. I can definitely agree with the whole aspect about how it requires a lot of courage. I mean, in a lot of these, like, I guess, unique cases, there are no, I guess, financial profits or anything that you can do to boost your career by standing up for these issues, a lot of times you actually lose on that part of your career or wherever you're currently at. And I guess, the whole issue of polarization also definitely doesn't also help, because I mean, in this polarized country, it requires more courage than ever to stand up for these issues, because I mean, it is so politicized. There are so many disagreements on this issue as well, when there really shouldn't be. But hopefully conversations like this will steer us a little bit more forward than we were before. But I guess moving on, this is a little bit more of a lighthearted question compared to the last two, but more to guys like kind of dive into each of your unique careers and the paths that you may have taken to get where you are today. But for this question, I just want each of you to tell us one of your most challenging experiences as a professional. Similarly, you can tell us one of the biggest accomplishments that you're most proud of. So I guess for this one, we can start with Milton, since we haven't started with them yet, and then we can move on to Tawana and Chad.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex. I appreciate it. One of the most disappointing ones that I've had during my career was actually applying for a senior vice president job. And they were looking for of course, the most qualified candidate. And that was right here in Austin, believe it or not. And I ended up in the top 3. I thought I had a decent interview, got it done, and I didn't get the job. Very disappointing. And the recruiter who recruited for this particular job gave feedback to each one of the candidates. Of course, didn't have to give feedback to the winning candidate, but said that they really didn't quite understand how the outcome came out the way that it did. And it ended up being very disappointing. And I just finally asked the question. I said, they didn't give me the job because I was Black. And it got real quiet. And they said, we didn't want to state that, but just maybe you getting turned down in this instance is really good for your career somewhere down the line. I didn't see that lining in it at that particular time, but said, oh my God, maybe this organization wasn't for me after all. One of the most exciting things that has ever happened for me, for my career, and it was during the last year that I was working as president and CEO at CPS Energy. I was in Washington, D.C., visiting with some senators about some work I was doing in San Antonio, and they wanted me to brief them on it, so I did it. And I got an email from Dean Craig Fenvis about the graduation speaker for the College of Engineering in May of 2010. And I sent a real quick note back to Dean Fenvis and said, it's obvious you got the wrong email address. About 5 minutes later, he shipped it to me back and said, just say yes, I did. So one of the most exciting things I've done that culminated my entire 40-year career almost was given the commencement address at the May graduation of the College of Engineering, Cockrell School, commencement address, and it was over 1,100 graduates, bachelor's and graduate students. And it was amazing. I had my mother there with me, my family, and I broke the tradition at UT, didn't know I was doing it. I actually shook everyone's hand except for one lady, and her religious beliefs did not let her shake hands with males. So I went from getting very disappointed to a commencement address at UT, and it really doesn't get any better than that. And I was very thankful. Thank you, Alex.
I'll chime in and give my most challenging professional experience. I've had the great fortune of navigating a career and working for great companies that just have afforded me so many opportunities throughout the years. I did at one point get headhunted away from a large company that I was working for to a different company. And, and I thought it was going to be a great opportunity to expand my skill sets, expand who I was as a person, sphere of influence, all those things you hope for, right, when you change. and change is always risky, and I was always one to take risks. So I moved to a new company, and when I arrived, I recognized probably within the first 30 days that I'd made a mistake, that this company culturally did not fit who I was and what I was looking for. And I will say that I stuck it out because that's what we do. We stick it out when we make these decisions about career and ourselves as long as I could. But it became a miserable existence, to be fair. And I needed to figure out what to do with that. And so as time moved along, I had to sort of redirect. And, I felt my career had been interrupted. I had this great track record. And here I am trying to figure this situation out. And I ended up visiting a good friend of mine who is a very well-renowned professor at Duke University. She's a true rock star. She was working in South Africa at the time on a sabbatical. And so I actually flew to South Africa to visit with her just to kind of get away a bit. But that visit turned out to be one of the best professional guidance sessions that I've ever had, because during our just casual conversations, she took me through a simple exercise of values. And she asked me to just jot down 10 things that I value. And of course, she went through let's chop off 6 of those. And I ended up with 4. So those 4 things that I valued were God, family, money, and peace of mind. And she said, chop off 1 more. I can't, because of who I am, get rid of God, right? Family is gonna always be there. That's my backbone. So I had to choose between money and peace of mind. And it became a difficult decision because sometimes you say money kind of gives you peace of mind. But at the end of the day, I chopped money because I believe that peace of mind really has no value. And when you have peace of mind, everything lines up together to give you everything that you so desire. And so in every decision that I made moving forward in my latter years of my career, I've always leveraged those 3 values and say, does it line up with what I truly believe is valuable for me? And if it doesn't, I walk away. If it's a big title, big money, all those things don't matter if peace of mind does not exist. And so I will say that was probably one of the most challenging times for me, and personally and career-wise, because I've kind of always had a track record of making really sound decisions based on data and just, moving about. And this was one time that it got interrupted. But I think that interruption was necessary to allow me to really see what was important and how I should move about my career a little bit differently. And I share that story a lot because I think people get caught up in different things. And really going back to what you intrinsically value is very important. And on the other side of that, what I'm most proud of, just really building on those values of family and peace of mind guidance, I've been fortunate to lead very diverse teams. And I have, been privy to lead people who, work in South America, live in South America that, don't necessarily speak English as a first language, and I had employees that didn't speak English. And so I had to figure out how to meet them where they were. And what I did was I learned Spanish. So I became fluent in Spanish to better communicate not only to my customers, but to my team members. And I use it in my everyday. I use it in travels. But what really drove me to that point was to try to establish a sense of trust and community amongst team members that are different from me. And in turn, one of my team members learned English. And he actually called me last week, and we don't work together, haven't worked together in years, but we still have that connection because we found that common ground. So that is one of the things that I'm extremely proud of, because I truly stepped out of a comfort zone on both occasions and learned so much about myself that it just became invaluable for me.
So Tawana made me feel bad because here I am taking care of all of these non-English speaking patients, and my medical Spanish is still so weak. I'm still dolor aquí. But languages are clearly not one of my gifts. So for me, I guess I would say the biggest challenge I faced professionally, the darkest time where I didn't think I was, I basically wanted to quit, was when I was an intern. A lot of rules have changed about the hours that interns can work, but when I was an intern, there were no rules, and they could require you to be in the hospital as much as they wanted. And I was working, one rotation was pretty bad. I was in the hospital pretty much all the time. I had to take call every third night. So every third night I spent the night in the hospital. And then I usually got to leave the hospital around somewhere between 10 and midnight. And I got to work at 3:30 a.m. So if you're doing the math, you recognize that I was working about 145 hours a week and a 169-hour week. And I started to have physical symptoms. I started to really struggle with determining what was real and what wasn't real, basically psychosis. And I came to work one day and was seeing things. And I realized that I was not, in my mind, I decided I'm not strong enough to do this. The culture of surgery at that time was very broken. And, but I determined I'm not physically fit to be a surgeon. And I just walked home and waited to be fired and it's hilarious that I had that perception. And I will say that the reason I share that story in this setting is because part of how I got to that place was my own perceptions of what I demanded from myself. And as a Black student or trainee, I gave myself no room to fail, no room to not be able to do everything that anyone else could do. I believed I had to outperform everyone at every turn. And that's an enormous amount of pressure. And when I finally realized physically that I was not able to do that, I just thought I was valueless. And I just walked home and I just waited to get fired and figure out, what am I going to do with my life? Well, I didn't get fired. My program director, first of all, he showed up at my house scared that I'd hurt myself, because they actually had a resident a few years kill themselves. When he walked through the door, I was, I thought he was there. He was kind of an aggressive guy. I thought he came through the door really with a wild look in his eye. I thought he was there to like beat me up and drag me back to work, but he actually was just so scared. He ran through the door to give me a big hug, and he was happy to see I was okay. And it was like the first time I realized that, this person is interested in me and isn't trying to figure out, well, why couldn't you do work as hard as person X? Well, it turns out the reason why I couldn't work as hard as person X was I had all of these things happen while I was on that rotation that didn't happen to anybody else, but I didn't know. And I didn't talk to anybody because so that was my mistake for not finding somebody who was a confidant and a friend. So that's something I share to anyone who's listening who thinks that you always have to be strong. No one can be strong all the time, and that will fail. And then the thing I'm most proud of, I'd say at this point in my life, the thing I'm most proud of is my role as an educator and as a mentor. In particular for the trainees and the medical students, the fact that I feel like they can come into my office and they can talk to me so that they don't end up, having one of those I can't do it moments like I did. So that to me is the thing I'm most proud of is my educator hat. A lot of people think because I'm a trauma surgeon, I save lives, that I'm proud of that stuff. But really, that's just epic. The person is shot and you just go into action. I mean, I'm not even thinking at that point. I'm just responding to my, the heuristics and the algorithms in my brain, and my experience is I just start trying to save the patient. But I have to be very intentional about supporting people and making time for people. And the fact that my colleagues look at me as a valuable colleague, and the fact that my residents and the students look at me as someone who's supportive, that's the thing I'm most proud of.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I can definitely say as a student, it's real inspiring to hear your stories. I mean, for me personally, like I get a bad grade on a test and I think, oh, maybe I should change majors. So like just getting to listen to your experiences and the ups and downs of your careers really just kind of gives me some like affirmation that like it's not the end of the world and that, you know, I am doing okay. And so thanks for being real vulnerable with like, you know, the challenges as well as like your accomplishments. Again, so like I just said in the chat, for anyone listening in, feel free to send in any questions you have, and we will definitely do our best to answer as many of them shortly. So the next question I have is, what piece of advice would you give to a young Black student or professional? So being a student or being a young professional is always kind of embarking a new chapter in your career or in your schooling. So it's really good to hear any sort of advice you may have to kind of put them on the right career path to, I guess, like some success. But yeah, for this one, I'll kind of just leave the floor open to whoever wants to chime in first. So go for it. Oh, Tawana, I don't think we can
Tawana.
hear you right now.
Sorry. Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. The piece of advice that I would get to give to students is to find your community. We underestimate the power of community, and Chad hit on something that was very important earlier in the conversation, is that, you know, we had this little small office in the Cockrell School that was the Nancy office that really became our community. It was a little family. You know, I was able to be a sister, a friend, an auntie, you know, all of those things in one, because we were able to establish that strong community. It became a safe space. So as we walked from our respective schools into that room, there was common ground. And we could talk about anything, share our issues, share our successes, and it was just a great place. So as I grew in my career, I really understood the power of community and the necessity of community, even to the point of working with business resource groups, as we talked about, with the different companies that I've been involved with. It's just so important to have that support structure. So that would be my advice, is to claim your community.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good piece of advice, and community is important, and your community obviously you can't limit it to people that look just like you and think just like you. But in particular, eventually, when I was, at the University of Texas, while we were I felt underrepresented on the campus in terms of Black students, this university was still big enough that there were enough people that looked like me that I could find a community to support me in terms of, navigating the university as a young Black man. But eventually that, you have to figure out who's going to be in your community, because cream rises to the top, and eventually you're going to keep rising to the top and find yourself in a room and you're the only one. And it can feel bad. So my advice I would give anyone, really, this isn't just for African-American students, but it's particularly for Black students, is first thing you need to do in your professional life is look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back at you has inherent value. You are valuable to somebody. When the institution that you're studying in doesn't feel like it values you, or your job or whatever doesn't value you, you have to value you. And it really helps to have a family and other things like that, maybe a spouse, maybe kids. I have small children, and they think I am the greatest doctor that ever lived, which is nice, because nobody else always, well, a few other people think that, but it's really important to have that. And I think if you value who you are, you can, withstand the ups and downs of professional life. And then I guess the next thing I would say is give yourself grace. You always want to try your best. You want to expect excellence from yourself, but really excellence should be in your effort. And sometimes you will try to do everything right and you will perform poorly, or the outcome won't be what you wanted. And you have to give yourself grace to recognize that you're going to fail. And that's something that I still struggle with, is giving myself grace to fail. But it's very important to be able to take risks, to be able to to step out and really do the big things that you can do in your career, instead of sort of being so afraid of failure that you don't ever go that way. Give yourself grace to fail. And then I guess the last thing I would say is follow the golden rule. It's, you know, in all your relationships, both professional and personal, you know, treat people with as much respect and much love and kindness as you can. Really, the place to attack isms, racism and sexism and all the isms in life is not in accusing someone or thinking that person is one individual, you know, unless they come out and told you, hey, I don't like you because of this. But is trying to have as good a relationship as you can with individuals. And then, I mean, obviously you need to fight the isms, but the isms need to be fought on a macro scale, on an institutional scale, on a larger scale, and a strategic scale. So try to have as good a relationship as you can with each person you work with and study with.
Yeah, I'll just add to this. I think Chad and Tawana has done a great job. I'll just add this. I think the key is being able to develop relationships at a young age that you can carry for a lifetime. And always remember, it's a two-way street that you must do. And those relationships that I created way back at UT, it wasn't that many, but there was a few. And I still have some of those to this day that we still communicate. I'm losing some of my high school and some of my college, as old as I am today. But those were long-term relationships that was mentored. We knew each other. We didn't have to pretend. And it really puts you in a good life where when you believe you are in darkness, that you actually have someone that you can call or go visit. I'm really jealous of somebody flying to South Africa to get herself straightened out there. I'm not too sure I could even find South Africa, but I think that tells a lot about Tawana's relationship that she had with her friend. And I think the key is developing those new relationships that you can and count on those in the same manner that you did with the old ones. And I think it's all about how you feel about yourself and your abilities. Just because you might fail at something doesn't mean you're a failure. Always try to do the best thing that you can at that particular moment and be willing to accept it, but move on and move on as quickly as you can.
Awesome. Thanks for all the great advice here. Like me, myself being the youngest of 3 siblings, I can always say that I'm always asking them for like, what would you do if you would do things differently? So, I mean, having that same sort of question right now with you 3 has been definitely very informational for me. But with that, that kind of just wraps up all of the questions I'll be asking from my end. At this point, we'll be going towards some questions that were submitted via the RSVP link, as well as some of the questions that have been submitted through the Q&A box here at the bottom. So feel free to maybe ask some more or send any more comments in the chat, and we'll take a look at them as well. But at this point, I'm going to be handing it off to Jason Sprinkle, who will be kind of leading this conversation with the Q&A questions just in a moment. So
we want to thank Alex and our panelists again for leading us in today's important discussion. So as he said, many of you submitted questions when you registered for today's event, and we'll ask a few of those, as well as some of the questions that have come in live. So this question for our panelists is from Pam Tucker, and it's an especially important one for most of us. So what actions would you hope to see from white allies, either professionally or personally?
I mean, I can start. I think, you know, we all believe that there's this big magic formula to, you know, how to get to the right place. And for me, it is fundamental around just really seeing people for who they are and understanding what they're going through. I always lean back on an experience that I had in the Department of Chemical Engineering going through school. And there was a period where I was ill in one of the classes, and my professor, who I think still teaches to this day, Dr. Mullins, was in the classroom, and I was, you know, not having a good day. I was actually sitting in the front row, tears rolling down my eyes because I was sick that day. I ended up leaving class and coming back to his office hours the next day. And one of the first questions that he asked me was, how are you doing? I saw you in the class. I saw these tears rolling down your eyes, and I just felt your pain. We talked about it a bit, and then we ended up talking about what I missed in the class. But I use that as a very simple example because that was a rare moment that I felt one of the professors really saw me for who I was. He saw me that day. He saw my pain. He saw what I was going through, and he helped me to get on the other side of it. And so that would be my advice to the allies. See us, see our pain, empathize with our pain, and help us to get on the other side of it. Because there is a truth that exists for all of us. And that would be my advice. It's simple, it's fundamental. It's all about showing that empathy and be willing to learn and listen.
Yeah, I would just add, it would be great, and I had to develop this over a whole, golly, I don't know how many years it was becoming a good listener and being able to ask the right open-ended questions so that you hear descriptions and can carry on a dialogue without yes and no answers. It took me a very long time to do it personally, and it took me a long time to do it professionally too. So good listening, I think, and ensuring that you're understanding what is trying to be communicated is absolutely critical to solve these critical issues we're dealing with today.
And then I guess I would add, be as an ally, be critical of your allyship. Now this is tough, right? I'm telling you, you're an ally. You are for this cause, but even allies have blind spots and have biases. And I can speak. I have more privilege than I'm Black, but I'm a straight Christian male, and I know a lot about privilege. And while I consider myself an ally of women in surgery, I recognize that I thought I was an ally 5 or 6 years ago, and I have subsequently learned that I still had blind spots, and I have to work on those things to really become the best ally I can be. Is to recognize I still have attitudes and things that I was trained to believe that are impacting the way that I perceive colleagues. That's not professional. That's not pertinent to the way that they perform. So I'm just being real. And as a Black man, I even have to mitigate attitudes I have about my own people. So if I've spent a lifetime trying to unlearn stereotypes and all kinds of stuff about Black people, and you're an ally, and you think that you magically just wished all of the racism out of your mind, you're wrong. It's not that easy. So I guess what I would say is, if you want to be an ally, you've got to be hyper vigilant about your attitudes, about the way you're perceiving things, because I can say on both sides of the fence, there is yet more stuff in there in that mind of ours to clean up.
Jason, I'll add one thing real quickly. I used a term working, an acronym PP. You got to learn to practice patience. Patience is a virtue that a lot of individuals can, I think, use to actually be very positive and very useful, along with the listening and being patient with it, could really help, I think, in a lot of different arenas if you really practice it on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. Those are all things we all need to take to heart. Thank you. How are you addressing DEI and racism issues in your community and within your workplace? Do you ever think that this activity is risky for you personally in your own profession? And what, if any, positive outcomes have you experienced?
I can speak if no one else wants to go first. For me, I am a huge advocate of the DEI space. I've advocated for women in STEM and so forth for a very long time. And one of the things that I'm doing, I would say, within my personal space is, being a part of the solution for my place of employment. As I said, I think companies are starting to do a great job of really putting pen to paper and trying to understand and uncover exactly what needs to be done to move the needle in a way that hasn't been done before. And so I take pride in knowing that my company is willing to listen to me. My company is willing to hear my thoughts, as honest as they may be, around what change needs to look like. Allowing me and people who look like me to have courageous conversations has been an important part of the process. And so there have been times when I have, had conversations with myself around how honest and open do I want to be? What does this mean for me from a career perspective? Is this a career limiting move if I say these things? And what I had to do was come to terms with what truth looks like. And if I'm being asked to be honest and open to create change, then that's what I need to do. And I've also instilled that same advice in others who've come to me asking the very same thing. I'm afraid to say this because of retaliation. But I'm proud to say that I've, worked for organizations even in my personal life. I'm on the board of the Urban League, whose mission is around equity, parity, empowerment amongst African Americans and underrepresented communities. Just being able to toggle back and forth between those spaces and tell my truth and be courageous has been just a wonderful thing. And I think it would be a great part of the change.
So Tawana has pricked me yet again in the sense that she learned to be very courageous, probably at a much younger age than I did. And while I was always willing to talk about these things, I wasn't really ready to show the full truth until very recently. And I jumped in with both feet recently and talked to my Department of Surgery about, some things that are really, really, really hard to open up with about, to be specific. One of the members, some of the people that I work with now saved the life of my cousin when he was shot by a police officer in his front yard. And it was a case of, mistaken identity but things escalated in his front yard, partially or maybe entirely because of the police officer's perception about what kind of person they had encountered. And because that touched me so personally, I decided to basically share personally. And this is something I was really, really unwilling to do until recently. But I finally got to the point in my career where I recognized that if I work in an institution that doesn't want me, that doesn't want the real me, and as hard as I work, I mean, when you get Chad Wilson, you are getting a lot of passion and a lot of effort. I don't come to work kind of like, oh, this is just something I do. I really bring a lot of myself, and I'm not going to invest, my hard work, my blood, my sweat, and my tears in an institution that doesn't honor and respect really who I am. And I'm 46, and it took me this many years to have the courage to sort of say, I'm not gonna give my all to an organization that's really won't support everything about me. And so, and actually, the question asked have some positive things. And actually, some positive things have come out of it, because while not everybody wanted to hear what I had to say, a lot of people reached out to me and said that it was impactful. So I have a whole group of people that I know care about the entire me, not just the face mask that I've worn for many years. And that is incredibly valuable and incredibly freeing. So I think we do have to work in this space, and I don't think, build up the courage and don't give your very best to an organization that you don't trust with your very best.
I'll just add this. I think it's when there's opportunities from a personal perspective and a professional perspective, both, that once you have been successful to whatever degree that it is, and you can actually make the difference in someone's life, their families, and leave a organization better than when you founded or when you worked there, or maybe you have your own company and you're an entrepreneur. Just make sure that you leave it in a better place with a discussion like we're having today. You need to become the CCO, the Chief Courage Officer, to make those tough decisions when needed and make sure you take full advantage of it. Because if you don't, then I think you have let yourself down and also these organizations and maybe your own company to a degree. And I think it's absolutely critical. There are some Blacks and others in real key positions who do not take this very seriously. I took it very seriously and did a lot of succession planning, ensuring that the right people were hired for the right potential opportunities, trained them, did leadership development, all things, so that hopefully decades later after I was gone, that this particular corporate entity would be in a much better position than today it is. So please, when you have those opportunities, take advantage of them, not only for yourself, but for others.
Thank you all for your powerful words and advice. I'm going to hand it back to Alex now. And for the questions that we didn't have time to get to, we will have a follow-up piece. So thank you for your questions.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, thanks again, everyone that submitted those questions. Those are all really important pieces of this conversation. You know, this conversation could go on for so long because I feel like there are so many moving pieces and components. But hopefully we did a good job of, you know, moving this conversation a little bit forward. But to wrap up, I know some people were interested about maybe some organizations that they can contribute to. Well, fortunately here at the National Society of Black Engineers at UT Austin, we are always looking for people to kind of help us out. Here on the slide, you can see that you're able to contribute directly to our chapter, and we use all of our funds to kind of provide opportunities for our members, whether that be professionally or academically. We're also, if you haven't already heard, we're also fundraising for a new scholarship endowment within the Cockrell School. And so what that means is that so far we've fundraised about $43,000 to create some new scholarships targeted towards increasing diversity within the Cockrell School. And so any dollar that you're able to donate directly on giving.texas.edu, you are able to help support us in providing these scholarships to these high school students that will be great individuals within our university. So with that being said, though, I'd like to finally thank all the panelists for spending their time with us, being vulnerable with us here during this hour, and also really just being a part of this conversation. And also thank you to everyone that was able to attend with us. I hope this was enjoyable, and I hope everyone got to learn something new during this discussion. Yeah, thank you, everyone. That's all from us today.